Part 1. The Invitation. The second diary I ever locked beneath the floorboards of Blackwood Manor did not begin with a scream. It began with cream paper, black wax, and a wedding invitation, written in a hand so careful that every letter looked afraid of being overheard. The Duke of Ravenscourt was to marry before Michaelmas. His Grace was a widower, or so society believed. His first wife, Lady Isabel Ashbourne, had been declared dead 12 years earlier after a carriage was found overturned near the river road. No body had been recovered, but grief, when attached to a title, is often accepted more quickly than truth. I knew none of this when the invitation arrived. I knew only that it was addressed to me, Eleanor Vale Blackwood, though I had never met the Duke, never visited Ravenscourt Abbey, and never imagined a bride would need a stranger to witness her vows. Adrian watched me break the seal at breakfast. Clara sat across from us with jam on her sleeve and a book open beside her plate, pretending not to listen, while listening with her entire soul. There was no ordinary letter inside, only the invitation, a pressed white rose, and a strip of paper cut from a church register. On it, in faint brown ink, someone had written that if the Duke spoke the vows, his first wife would die a second time. I read the sentence 3 times before I understood that it had not been written as poetry. It had been written as a warning. 1 year had passed since Blackwood Manor surrendered its secrets to light. I had learned by then that grand houses do not forget their crimes. They store them in attics, in ledgers, in locked music rooms, in the mouths of servants trained to swallow fear with their tea. I might have ignored the invitation if it had asked for pity. Pity is often a mask worn by manipulation. But the rose had been pressed between pages from a prayer book, and one petal was marked with a smear of dark blue ink, the color used by solicitors when a woman is made to disappear on paper. Mr. Gray recognized it before I did. He told me that Ravenscourt Abbey had buried more than one truth. He told me the Duke's mother had ruled the estate since her son's first marriage collapsed. He told me the bride, Miss Beatrice Rowe, was young, obedient, and nearly penniless. Then he told me the most interesting thing. No one at Ravenscourt had invited me. The handwriting belonged to a dead woman. By dusk, my trunk was packed. Adrian did not forbid me. A lesser husband might have done so and called it concern. He only placed his hand over mine and reminded me that some houses bite when cornered. I told him that I had survived Blackwood. He answered that survival was no proof of immunity. I kissed his cheek for that, because wisdom offered without command is one of the rarer forms of love. The next morning, under a sky the color of pewter milk, Mr. Gray and I took the north road toward Ravenscourt Abbey, carrying one invitation, one dead woman's rose, and the uneasy knowledge that somewhere ahead of us, a wedding was being prepared like a trap. On the road, I kept returning to the strangeness of the phrase. She would die a second time. Not he would be deceived, not the bride would suffer. The warning named the first wife as the person in danger, which meant the writer believed death could be repeated by law, by vow, by public ceremony. That frightened me more than murder would have done. Murder ends a body. A false record can keep ending a life for years while everyone calls it order. I had learned that invitations are never innocent when they arrive without a sender. A true invitation tells a guest where to sit. This one told me where to look. It did not ask me to celebrate the Duke's marriage. It asked me to doubt it before it happened. That difference mattered. Celebration belongs to the living. Doubt, when placed correctly, can keep them alive. I did not yet know whether I was walking toward a crime, a madness, or a cruel trick. I knew only that a woman had reached through paper because every louder path had failed her. That was reason enough to go. That is why I packed not only dresses, but patience. A mystery wrapped in nobility does not open because one pulls hard. It opens because one notices which hinge has been polished by use.
Part 2. Ravenscourt Abbey. Ravenscourt Abbey rose from the moor like a cathedral that had lost its faith. Its windows were tall and narrow, its chimneys black with old smoke, its gardens cut into obedient shapes by men who feared wildness in every form. The house did not welcome, it inspected. Servants lined the entrance hall when we arrived, their faces so carefully empty that I felt the old Blackwood chill along my spine. A house does not need chains to hold people prisoner. Sometimes all it needs is a wage, a secret, and a mistress who knows where every weakness is buried. The Dowager Duchess of Ravenscourt descended the stairs in mourning silk, though her son was to be married within 48 hours. She was a beautiful old woman, in the way a blade can be beautiful, thin and polished, and made for harm. She greeted Mr. Grey with the warmth one gives a closed door. She greeted me as if I were a stain that had arrived by post. I told her I had come to honour the invitation. She told me there must have been a mistake. There are women who lie with noise, and women who lie with stillness. The Dowager belonged to the second kind. Her face did not change, but the fingers around her jet rosary tightened until the beads clicked like teeth. The Duke entered before she could dismiss us. Nathaniel Ashbourne, Duke of Ravenscourt, was not what scandal sheets had made him. I had expected arrogance, perhaps dissipation, perhaps the cold vanity of a man accustomed to being forgiven. Instead, I found a man in his mid-40s, dark-haired, with silver at the temples, broad-shouldered, exhausted, and carrying grief like a coat he had forgotten how to remove. He looked at the invitation. He looked at the rose. For one moment, all colour left his face. That was when I stopped wondering whether the warning was cruel nonsense. A guilty man often grows angry when the past enters a room. A wounded one grows pale. The bride came to tea an hour later. Miss Beatrice Rowe was 29, not the child rumour had described. She wore dove-grey silk, no jewels, and an expression so composed that I immediately distrusted it. Not because it was false, but because it had been practised under pressure. She asked whether Blackwood Manor was as lonely as people said. I answered that loneliness depends less on the size of a house than on the number of truths permitted inside it. She lowered her eyes, and in that downward glance I saw fear, not of the Duke, but for him. Before dinner, I passed a portrait turned toward the wall in the long gallery. No dust lay on the frame. Someone had moved it recently. When no one watched, I touched the gilt edge and turned it just enough to see a woman's hand painted against blue satin. On the fourth finger was a sapphire ring shaped like a closed eye. Later, at table, I saw the same ring hanging from the Dowager's neck. Lady Isabel Ashbourne had supposedly drowned 12 years earlier. The dead wives do not usually lend their jewels to the women who hated them. At dinner, the Duke barely touched his wine. The Dowager noticed every movement he did not make. Beatrice noticed everything the Dowager noticed. That left me free to watch Calder, the steward, who stood near the sideboard with the stillness of a man who had trained servants to fear the sound of his shoes. When the first wife's name was mentioned by a guest, a spoon slipped from a maid's hand. Calder did not look at the maid. He looked at the ceiling, toward the rooms above the chapel. The house displayed old victories everywhere. Antlers above doors, battle maps in corridors, silver cups won by dead men whose names no servant dared mispronounce. Yet there was no visible trace of the first Duchess, except the hidden portrait and the ring stolen into mourning jewellery. When a family removes a woman from every room, it is rarely because she was unimportant. It is because she mattered too much. The dowager's control was most visible in what never happened. No servant interrupted. No door closed loudly. No chair scraped. Even fear had been taught etiquette at Ravenscourt. The Duke watched his mother as one watches a locked cabinet containing something that may be medicine or poison. He knew she held power. He had not yet understood how much of that power had been made from his obedience.
Part 3. The Bride Who Would Not Smile. The next morning, Ravenscourt Abbey dressed itself for joy and failed. White ribbons hung from banisters like bandages. Flowers crowded the chapel until the air smelled too sweet, as if roses and lilies had been ordered to conceal something spoiled beneath the stone. Miss Beatrice allowed 3 maids to arrange her veil. I watched from the doorway, invited by no one, tolerated by everyone, and ignored by only the foolish. She looked beautiful in the way sacrificial things are often made beautiful before they are offered. Her hands did not tremble. That disturbed me more than trembling would have done. Fear that has no movement has already passed through panic and settled into decision. On the dressing table lay a small silver comb set with pearls. It was old, much older than Beatrice's fashion. A letter opener rested beside it, its handle carved with a Ravenscourt crest. The blade was clean, but the paper beneath it bore 3 pierced holes, as if someone had stabbed the same word again and again until the page surrendered. I asked whether she wished to marry the Duke. She did not answer in any direct way. She said only that some vows were spoken by the wrong mouths, because the right mouths had been silenced. No dialogue passed between us after that. None was needed. She lifted her veil, and I saw a bruise-colored shadow beneath one eye, too faint to accuse a person, too deliberate to dismiss as sleeplessness. When she noticed that I had seen it, she smiled for the first time. It was not a bride's smile. It was a conspirator's. By noon, I had learned 3 things. First, the Duke had postponed this marriage twice, and each postponement had been followed by a private visit from his mother. Second, Lady Isabel's death certificate had been signed not by a parish doctor, but by Mr. Calder, the estate steward, who had no medical training and too much influence over the household accounts. Third, every servant who had worked at Ravenscourt during Isabel's marriage had either died, left without reference, or been pensioned to cottages beyond the North Wood. Mr. Gray listened to these facts in the old library, where dust lay thick on theology and thin on ledgers. That difference told us where the household spent its attention. In the ledger for the year of Isabel's disappearance, we found monthly payments to a private sanatorium near St. Bartholomew's Marsh. The name attached was not Isabel Ashbourne. It was I.A. Initials are useful to cowards. They give a lie the shape of record-keeping. Mr. Gray copied the entry. I watched the door. At the end of the passage, half hidden behind a curtain, stood a little maid no older than 16. She did not speak. She only lifted her hand and pointed upward, toward the old music room. The dowager had told us that wing was closed for repairs. Houses, I had discovered, are always being repaired exactly where the truth is kept. The bride's chamber had 2 windows, both latched from the inside, and yet Beatrice kept glancing toward them, as if expecting a message from the glass. On the sill, half hidden beneath lace, I found a petal from the same kind of white rose that had arrived in my invitation. It had not blown there by chance. Someone in Ravenscourt was still sending signals in flowers because words had become too dangerous.
The bells were tested that afternoon. Their sound moved through the abbey stones and made every pane tremble. Beatrice did not flinch. The maids did. One crossed herself when she thought no one watched. I remembered then that wedding bells and funeral bells are cousins. Both announce that a life has changed its name. At Ravenscourt, I feared they meant to do both at once. I have never trusted rooms prepared too carefully. A truly joyful room forgets something. A ribbon crooked, a flower fallen, a glove left behind. Beatrice's chamber had forgotten nothing except innocence. On Beatrice's glove, I saw a thread of blue silk. Not bridal white, not dove gray. The same blue as the hidden portrait. A careless thread can sometimes tell the truth a careful mouth cannot.
Part 4. The Music Room. The old music room sat above the east chapel, behind a door painted the same color as the wall. A person could pass it for years and see nothing but paneling. That is how many women are erased, not by dramatic violence, but by making the door to their existence match the rest of the house. The maid had vanished by the time Mr. Gray and I reached the corridor. I did not blame her. Courage in servants is expensive. It can cost a place, a wage, a roof, a brother's apprenticeship, a mother's medicine. I carried no candle. The afternoon light fell through a cracked skylight and broke itself across the floor in pale bars. The room smelled of dust, lavender, and illness. At first, I saw only sheets over furniture. A harp with 2 broken strings, a pianoforte locked shut, a vase of dead stems. Then something moved behind a screen embroidered with swans. Mr. Gray placed himself slightly before me. I stepped around him because I had not come so far to hide behind a good man. The woman seated by the window was thin enough that the bones of her wrists seemed drawn rather than made. Her hair, once perhaps auburn, had faded in long, dull waves around a face still striking beneath years of confinement. She wore a blue dressing gown gone pale at the seams. On her left hand was no wedding ring, but on the table beside her lay its impression in dust. Lady Isabel Ashbourne was alive. Not ghostly. Not mad in the theatrical manner convenient to families who need a woman disbelieved. Alive. Watchful. Frightened. Furious beneath the fright. She looked at me as if I were another trick invented by the house. I said my name slowly. I told her I had come because of a white rose and a warning. At the word rose, she closed her eyes. Some memories are not remembered. They are endured again. The story came from her in fragments, and I gathered each piece as carefully as broken glass. 12 years earlier, she had discovered that the Dowager and Calder were moving money from the Ravenscourt trusts into accounts that would become untouchable if the Duke produced no legitimate heir. Isabel had been with child then. She had intended to tell her husband after the harvest ball. Before she could, the carriage accident was arranged. The child was lost. Isabel was not. That, the Dowager had decided, was inconvenient. A living duchess could accuse. A grieving son could be controlled. A dead wife could be mourned publicly and imprisoned privately if the right doctors were paid to call her mind unsound. Nathaniel had believed her dead because grief had been handed to him with documents, witnesses, and a mother who wept only when watched. For 12 years, Isabel had been moved between sanatorium rooms, rented cottages, and finally this forgotten chamber when questions about expenses grew dangerous. She had written dozens of letters. None reached him. until Beatrice Rowe arrived. That was the first time I understood the bride was not a victim walking blindly toward the altar. She was carrying a match into a room filled with gas. Isabel asked whether the Duke had remarried already, not whether he loved another woman, not whether he had forgotten her, only whether the law had replaced her. That was when I understood how confinement teaches a woman to fear paper more than stone. Stone walls declare themselves. Paper smiles, folds neatly, and travels farther than a scream. I told her the vows had not yet been spoken. For the first time, she looked toward the door as if a future might still be standing behind it. I asked Isabel whether she remembered the white rose. She looked toward the dead stems in the vase and said, not in direct speech, but in the old language of grief, that roses had grown beneath her childhood window. Beatrice knew that. Beatrice had used the flower not as decoration, but as proof of origin. A forged document can imitate a signature. It cannot easily imitate what a woman loved before she was useful. Isabel's voice did not break when she described the years. That made the story worse, not better. Some pain, repeated long enough, learns to stand upright and speak like ordinary memory. Isabel's hands worried the edge of her sleeve while she spoke. Not wildly, methodically. The fabric had been repaired many times. I wondered then how often a captive woman mends what imprisons her because there is nothing else left to control.
Part 5. The False Bride. Miss Beatrice Rowe was not in love with the Duke. She had never pretended otherwise to anyone whose opinion mattered. She was Isabel's cousin, raised in the poorer branch of a family too proud to admit poverty and too frightened to challenge a duchess. For years, Beatrice had searched for proof that Isabel lived. She had found only rumours, unsigned bills, and the testimony of servants dismissed before they could speak safely. Then the dowager chose her as the Duke's second wife. There are traps that become doors when a woman has the nerve to walk into them with her eyes open. Beatrice accepted the proposal, because refusal would have sent the dowager looking for another bride. One less aware, one easier to bury in silk. By entering Ravenscourt, Beatrice gained access to rooms, ledgers, servants, keys, and the Duke's own sorrow. She had not meant to marry him. She had meant to stop the wedding loudly enough that the law could no longer pretend not to hear. The invitation to me had been her risk. She had found my name in a newspaper account of the Blackwood arrests, where some careless columnist described me as the woman who opened a locked wing and found a daughter inside a lie. Beatrice decided that if I had survived one house of secrets, I might understand another. She was wrong in one detail only. One does not survive such houses unchanged. That was why I understood her at once. When I returned to the bride's chamber, she was gone. Her veil lay across a chair. The pearls from her comb had been scattered on the floor, in a line leading toward the chapel stairs. To a careless eye, it looked like panic. To mine, it looked like a trail. The household erupted beautifully. The dowager demanded doors searched. Calder sent footmen to the stables. Guests whispered behind gloves and hymnals. The Duke stood in the chapel aisle with his hands at his sides, not abandoned, not angry, but struck by some old terror he had never escaped. I watched him watch the empty doorway. No man acts that way because a convenient bride is late. He acted that way because disappearance had returned for him, wearing white. Mr. Grey moved among the guests as if age had made him harmless. I have always admired that about elderly men of intelligence.
People underestimate them and call it manners. I followed the pearls. They led not to the outer door, not to the stables, not to any route a frightened bride might take. They led downward, beneath the chapel, into a crypt older than the present house. There, among marble angels and damp stone, I found Beatrice kneeling beside a trunk. Inside were letters tied with blue ribbon, a child's christening cap, and every reply Isabel had written to a husband who never received them. Beatrice had not vanished to escape the wedding. She had vanished to make us find the proof before the vows could erase it. The crypt trunk had been hidden beneath a loose altar cloth from the funeral chapel, a place no one dusted because old grief is considered decoration in noble houses. Beatrice had used that laziness as shelter. Inside the trunk, the letters were not arranged like relics. They were arranged like evidence. Dates in one stack, names in another, receipts folded beside the lies they contradicted. A desperate woman had become an archivist because no one else would become her witness. Above us, the organ began again. The wedding was reforming itself while we knelt among proofs of another marriage not yet dead. I could feel time pressing down through the chapel floor. There are discoveries one wishes to examine carefully. There are others that must be carried while still burning. We took the letters, the cap, the receipts, and the register strip. Beatrice lifted the trunk lid one last time, as if saying farewell to the years it had protected. We could not carry every paper. That is one cruelty of truth. After years of searching, one must choose quickly which proof the world will bother to understand. When we climbed back from the crypt, the sound of the organ changed. The prelude had ended. The ceremony was beginning. Time, which had crept all morning, suddenly ran.
Part 6. The Duke learns the truth. There are moments when truth should arrive with thunder, but instead enters quietly, because the heart cannot survive spectacle. Nathaniel Ashbourne learned his wife was alive in the chapel crypt, beneath the marble name of a woman who had never been buried. I did not bring Isabel to him at once. That would have been cruelty disguised as romance. 12 years of stolen grief cannot be repaired by opening a door and demanding tenderness perform on command. I brought him letters first. He recognized her hand before he read a word. I watched a duke become a widower in reverse. His face did not crumple. Men of his station are trained early to make a prison of their expressions. But the paper shook in his hands. And when he reached the final page, he lowered himself onto the stone step, as if his body had briefly forgotten rank. Beatrice stood at the far end of the crypt, white dress dimmed by candle smoke. She looked less like a bride than a witness. Mr. Gray read the ledger entries aloud, not dramatically, not accusingly, simply as facts sharpened by patience. The Duke listened. Then he asked for his mother. I advised against haste. Grief lunges. Justice measures. The dowager had ruled Ravenscourt for too long to be defeated by a son's rage, however righteous. Calder still held keys. Servants still feared their pensions. Guests still preferred scandal to responsibility. The law, like an old gate, opened slowly unless several hands pushed together. So we gave Ravenscourt what it expected. We let the wedding continue. Not to complete it, but to bring every liar into the same room. Beatrice returned to her chamber. Isabel remained hidden in the music room with Mr. Gray's assistant, a quiet young clerk who had arrived with our luggage and whose talent for being overlooked now proved useful. The Duke stood before the altar as planned. The dowager entered in black silk, triumphant enough to forget caution. Calder carried the marriage papers. That was his mistake. Forgers are often sentimental about documents. They believe paper protects them because paper has protected them before. The guests rose. The organ began. Beatrice walked down the aisle without smiling. I stood near the side chapel with the blue letters in my hand and Isabel's sapphire ring hidden inside my glove. Just before the vows, Beatrice stopped. Not from fear, from timing. Mr. Gray stepped forward and asked that the marriage license be examined before witnesses, since the groom's first wife might not be dead. The chapel made the sound only rich rooms can make when their politeness is injured. The dowager laughed once. It was the least convincing sound I had ever heard. Then I placed Isabel's letters on the altar rail, and the Duke removed his mother's necklace, the one holding his first wife's ring, and laid it beside them. Before we returned to the chapel, I asked Nathaniel whether he wished to see Isabel first. He closed his eyes so briefly that another person might have missed it. He refused. Not because he lacked love, but because he feared making his own grief the centre of her rescue. That answer told me more about him than any apology would have done. Some men want forgiveness before truth is safe. He wanted truth safe first. The Duke asked whether Isabel had suffered. No one answered quickly. That silence was kinder than comfort would have been. There are questions whose answers cannot be softened without becoming insults. He understood the silence and aged inside it. When he rose, he was still a duke to the chapel above. But in the crypt, for one unguarded instant, he was only a husband, discovering that grief had been easier than truth. I watched Nathaniel choose restraint, and I thought of Adrian at Blackwood. The best men I had known were not those without anger, but those who refused to make their anger another woman's burden. He asked for water after reading the third letter. No one moved at first. Dukes command armies, estates, dinners, signatures. But there, in the crypt, a glass of water became too ordinary for servants to remember.
Part 7. The Wife in Blue. The dowager did not faint. I respected her for that, in the way one respects a storm for not pretending to be rain. She accused Beatrice of hysteria. She accused Mr. Gray of professional ambition. She accused me of vulgar interference, which I accepted as the nearest thing to a confession she was likely to give. Calder attempted to gather the papers. The Duke placed one hand over them. That small gesture altered the air. For 12 years, Ravenscourt had obeyed the mother because the son was grief-struck. Now the son stood still, and stillness in a wounded man can be more dangerous than shouting. Then Lady Isabel Ashbourne entered the chapel. She wore the blue gown from her portrait, though it hung looser now. Beatrice had dressed her with careful hands. Her hair had been pinned simply. She carried no bouquet, no weapon, no proof except herself. And yet the entire chapel understood that proof had entered. Some women are made invisible for so long that when they return, the world must rearrange itself around the fact of them. The Duke turned. I looked away at first. There are griefs too intimate for witnesses, even when justice requires a room full of them. When I looked again, he had not touched her. Neither had she reached for him. They stood several paces apart, two people separated by 12 years.
a false grave, a stolen child, and 1,000 unsent letters. But he bowed his head, not as a duke to a duchess, as a man before the woman he had failed by believing she was beyond rescue. Isabel did not forgive him. Not then. Forgiveness offered too quickly is often only exhaustion trying to be noble. She simply remained standing. Sometimes after being erased, remaining is the first victory. Mr. Gray read the false death certificate before the witnesses. He read Calder's signature. He read the sanatorium payments. He read the account transfers. He read the dates of Isabel's confinement and the names of the doctors who had been paid to misunderstand her sanity. With every sentence, the dowager seemed to grow smaller without moving. Power hates documentation when documentation changes sides. Calder tried to leave through the vestry. 2 constables, summoned before dawn by Mr. Gray, prevented it with admirable lack of drama. The dowager looked not at her son, nor at Isabel, but at me. I think she understood then that I had not come to ruin a wedding. I had come to attend a resurrection. The chapel candles had been lit for matrimony. They became, without anyone admitting it, lights for an inquiry. Faces that had arrived hungry for romance, now sharpened with the appetite of scandal. I disliked them for that, but I also used them. Public witnesses are vulgar tools, but sometimes vulgar tools are the only ones heavy enough to break a polished lie. A bishop had been invited to bless the wedding. He looked profoundly inconvenienced by resurrection. I could not fault him entirely. Religion often handles miracles better in scripture than in family law. Still, he remained. That helped us. A scandal witnessed by clergy grows legs before supper. The dowager knew it too. Her face became colder, not frightened, and that told me she was choosing which lie to use first. The chapel guests leaned forward despite themselves. They had come to witness a union. They were about to witness a household being divided from its lies. Beatrice's veil looked almost silver beneath the chapel lamps. I remember thinking how strange it was that cloth meant for innocence had become our banner of accusation.
Part 8. What the bride wanted. By evening, the guests had departed, with the hungry speed of people who wished to carry scandal away while pretending they had been wounded by witnessing it. Ravenscourt Abbey, stripped of flowers and whispers, seemed older than it had that morning. The wedding breakfast went untouched. Silver cooled. Cakes sagged beneath sugar roses. Champagne stood unopened beside glasses no one had the courage to lift. In the small morning room, Beatrice removed her veil and folded it as carefully as a flag from a lost country. She had saved a duchess by agreeing to look like a bride. The Duke offered her settlement, protection, and public honor. She accepted the protection, refused the honor, and asked instead that every pensioned servant from the year of Isabel's disappearance be found and heard. That, I thought, was the first selfish thing she had asked all day. It was not selfish at all. Women who have been used by powerful families often ask for justice in the language of paperwork, because rage is dismissed when it wears a woman's face. Isabel did not see Nathaniel privately until after sunset. I know because I sat outside the music room with a cup of tea gone cold. Not as guardian, but as witness, should she need one. Their reunion was not the kind poets sell to young hearts. No running across lawns, no immediate embrace, no declaration loud enough for servants to repeat downstairs. It was slower. It was 2 chairs near a window, a table between them, a stack of letters placed where both could see them,
A man speaking carefully because every word had arrived 12 years late. A woman listening with the face of someone deciding whether truth, once stolen, can be returned without cutting the hands that carry it. I did not hear all of it. I did not need to. Near midnight, Isabel opened the door and asked for more ink. That told me more than tears would have done. She was writing her own account. Not for gossip, not for vengeance alone. For the record. There is a sacredness in a woman writing herself back into existence. The next morning, the Dowager Duchess was taken from Ravenscourt in a closed carriage. Calder followed under guard, gray as candle ash. The newspapers would later call it a financial conspiracy. Men often prefer crimes with numbers because they are less embarrassed by arithmetic than by cruelty. But I knew what it had truly been. It had been the attempted murder of a woman's place in the world. And it had failed. Isabel's first request after the arrests was not for her jewels, nor her rooms, nor even for solitude. She asked that the music room windows be opened. For 12 years, air had entered her life only by permission. When the latch lifted, the curtains moved as if the room itself had been holding its breath. She stood in that draft with her eyes closed, and no one dared hurry her. When Calder was stopped, he did not protest innocence. He protested procedure. That is the instinct of men who have mistaken rules for morality. He objected to the constables, to Mr. Gray's timing, to the presence of guests, to the impropriety of a woman appearing after being declared dead. Not once did he object to the suffering. That omission condemned him more cleanly than panic could have done. When the windows opened, dust lifted into the evening light. It looked almost golden. Even neglect, when exposed, can shine briefly before it disappears. The servants did not cheer when the constables left with Calder. People who have lived under fear rarely celebrate immediately. First, they test the silence to see whether it will strike back.
Part 9. The ring returned. 3 days after the wedding that did not happen, Ravenscourt Abbey opened its long gallery. Servants removed dust cloths, footmen carried ladders. A housemaid with red hands polished the frames until her own face looked back from the gilding. No one gave the order loudly. The Duke simply unlocked the gallery himself and stepped aside. Lady Isabel's portrait was turned from the wall. For a moment, no one spoke. The painted woman wore blue satin and a sapphire ring shaped like a closed eye. The living woman stood beneath it in a plain gown, thinner, older, no longer preserved by art or destroyed by rumor. I thought the portrait looked less alive than she did. Nathaniel returned the ring in the garden, not in the chapel, not before servants, not with speech polished for forgiveness. He placed it on the stone bench between them. The choice remained hers. That mattered to me. Too many men mistake apology for a key that opens whatever door they regret having locked. But remorse is not ownership, and love, if it is to be worthy of the name, must sometimes stand outside the room and wait to be invited. Isabel did not put the ring on. She lifted it, studied it, and closed her fingers around it. For that day, it was enough. Beatrice left Ravenscourt before noon. She wore traveling brown instead of bridal white and looked younger for having escaped a future that was never hers. Mr. Gray arranged her passage to an aunt in Bath, where scandal, if fed carefully, becomes independence. Before she entered the carriage, she pressed the white rose into my hand. It had dried almost flat, petals translucent as old paper. I kept it, not because I wished to remember danger, but because I wished to remember precision. Beatrice had sent one rose, one invitation, one sentence. With so little, she had moved the first stone of a buried house. Never despise small signals. they are often all the desperate can afford. When I returned to Blackwood Manor, Clara met me at the door before the footman could open it. She was trying to look casual and failing magnificently. Adrian stood behind her, pretending he had not spent 3 days walking past the front windows. I gave Clara the harmless details first: the gowns, the abbey, the wedding breakfast no one ate. Then I gave Adrian the truth, because a husband who loves a woman like me must learn that she returns from mysteries with shadows in her pockets. He listened until the end. Then he asked whether I was tired. I told him I was always tired after watching a house confess. Clara asked whether Beatrice had been frightened. I told her yes, and brave also, because those two conditions often arrive together. Clara considered that with the seriousness of a young woman still learning that courage does not always feel noble while it is happening. Adrian said nothing for a long while. Then he took my hand beneath the table where Clara could not see and pressed it once. Blackwood looked different when I returned from Ravenscourt. Not safer, exactly. I no longer believed any house was safe merely because I loved someone inside it. But it looked honest in its wounds. Its repaired rooms did not pretend never to have been locked. That is perhaps the best a house can become. Not innocent, truthful. Clara later asked whether all great houses had secrets. I told her all houses have secrets, but great houses have more rooms in which to hide them. That evening, Blackwood's lamps were already lit, though the sky had not fully darkened. It was Clara's doing, I later learned. She wanted the house to look as if it had been waiting awake.
Part 10. The Diary's second lesson. That night, I placed the white rose inside my diary, beside Marian's black enamel brooch. One token from a dead woman who had saved her child. One token from a living woman who had saved a wife. I wondered how many histories would change if women were believed the first time they wrote for help. The world prefers its lost wives silent. Silent women make convenient legends. They can be pitied without being obeyed, mourned without being restored, painted without being allowed to speak from the frame. Lady Isabel Ashbourne refused to remain a portrait. In the months that followed, Ravenscourt did not become happy all at once. Happiness is not a curtain one draws over damage. Isabel chose a suite overlooking the East Garden, not the Duchess's chamber. Nathaniel visited when invited. Beatrice wrote from Bath and later from London, where she discovered that scandal attached to courage can become a strange kind of dowry. The dowager's trial filled columns. The papers loved the forged accounts, the hidden sanatorium, the wedding interrupted at the altar. They did not understand the quietest part, and therefore the most important. The Duke and Duchess had to learn each other again as living people, not as victim and penitent, not as saint and sinner, as man and woman, altered by time, still standing on opposite sides of a table covered with letters. I have been asked why I record such stories when peace would be easier. The answer is simple. Peace built on silence belongs to the liar. Peace built on truth may limp. It may arrive late. It may sit in separate chairs for a season and speak softly because the wound is still listening. But it belongs to the living. That is worth writing down. Before I slept, I opened the diary and wrote the second lesson Ravenscourt taught me. A woman can be declared dead by ink, by title, by law, by family, by fear. But if one witness keeps looking for her, she is not entirely gone. I did not know then how many invitations would find me in the years to come. Some sealed with wax, some hidden in hymnals.
some carried by trembling maids, some written by women the world had already buried. But after Ravenscourt, I learned to open every envelope slowly. For every diary has a locked page, and every locked page waits for someone stubborn enough to turn the key. I did not sleep quickly that night. Rain tapped the blackwood windows in the same patient rhythm that had accompanied my first journey into danger. On my desk lay the rose, the diary, and the key to a drawer that already held more secrets than any respectable woman should possess. Respectability, I had learned, is often only a curtain. Truth is the window behind it. Before closing the diary, I touched Marian's brooch and the rose from Ravenscourt. Two women, one dead and one restored, had taught me the same lesson from opposite shores. Love is not proved by keeping a woman beautiful in memory. Love is proved by making room for her truth when it ruins the story everyone preferred. I have often wondered whether the diary made me brave, or whether bravery required somewhere private to tremble afterward. Perhaps both are true. I wrote until the candle guttered low. Then I locked the page, not to hide the truth forever, but to keep it safe until the world was ready to hear it.